Hello. Welcome to everyone just joining. We'll want to give everyone that registered a few more minutes to come on in. We'll be using Pear Deck today, so please go ahead and use a second uh, browser tab or another device to go ahead and log in. We'll be using it in a slightly different way than we have in the past. We're exploring a new feature today, which hopefully will be helpful to you as well. We'll give everyone another minute or two to come on in, and then we'll get started. We'll give it just another few seconds or so to let everyone settle into Pear Deck and come on in. Okay. And for anyone joining late, we are using Pear Deck today, but we do want to honor the time of everyone that is here and in. So let's go ahead and get started. That join code is still projected up here in the upper right-hand corner of the screen if you are needing to need a little bit later on through the session. Welcome. Here we are. It's Appy Hour. We are at the home stretch of our fall webinar series here before we take a brief hiatus to recharge and think about what most makes sense for all of our partners as we move into the latter parts of the fall semester here. But we wanted to spend this session really talking a little bit of talking with you and having you share some of your experiences, as well as providing some of our thinking in how we can best choose some of the apps and programs to best support student engagement and learning throughout this distance learning or blended learning as we might find ourselves in. I'm Randall Lober. I'm a senior instructional specialist here with IRE. Unfortunately, my colleague, Dr. Anissa Collins, was not able to make it to this session here, but her lovely picture is still posted here in our slide deck. And I'm sure you're all familiar with her. But she says hi, and we'll see more from her soon. As we go through our session today, we've got three big outcomes we want to attend to. The first one is we want to explore a decision tree to help us select apps to use in specific contexts. So when we're choosing apps to support engagement and learning with our kiddos, why are we choosing those apps and what criteria are we using for that? Second, we want to give you an opportunity to reflect on some of the experiences with apps that you've implemented so far. And also, through some collaborative conversation, identify some other apps for potential exploration. So unlike any other webinars, perhaps that we've hosted, and certainly that you may have attended over the past, since all of this distance learning and hybrid learning started, this one is really going to be discussion-based in the back end of it, where we'll have a chance to either unmute ourselves or to talk in chat or whatever you feel comfortable with. So we'll begin and end on time. As always, we'll stay focused throughout. Please be respectful, especially as we share our own passions and ideas and apps that we might be passionate about. We're all here as learners, so please assume that positive intent and that everyone is speaking their story and their truth as they're moving forward. As we go forward, please use the chat feature for any questions or responses. And as you are doing now, please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. Please continue to keep the chat flowing and share with us any questions, comments, concerns you might have. We'll track and respond to those. And just so we're up front, we'll be recording the chat as well so we can follow up in any unanswered questions or comments, and as well as collect any resources from you that might be helpful for the good of all registrants for this session. So we'll use our first Pear Deck prompt today, and we wanted to get a little bit of your perspective on how you're making some decisions now. So as you think about whether your role in either supporting teachers or if you are a classroom teacher supporting your own learners, what are some of the criteria you use when you're deciding what apps will support student or teacher learning? So in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, whether you're on mobile or otherwise, there should be a green prompt that says answer question. That will, as you might infer, allow you to answer the question, submit a short text response. We'll give you just a brief moment to drop some thinking there before we go forward. Okay. And let's take a look at some of those responses. First, as we, and some of them are still in motion. First, foremost is, does it integrate with our LMS or Google Classroom, right? Does it live and pair well with what we're already using, or is it another add-on thing? And that is a huge consideration, especially as both us and students are trying to manage that cognitive load of all the apps that might be coming our way. Is it friendly enough for kids to use? There's a take-home version, as well as what professional learning the adults will need to support the implementation of that app are all valid concerns. And another participant shares with us the idea that is it actually engaging for kids or for learners? Is it easy to use? Does it seem to flow well? And can it be used in different ways? And certainly, is it approved by the district, right? Many districts, as we are working through this partnership and they're working through both planning and refining their plans, are finding that some apps work better for certain purposes than others. Some licensing agreements line up better, and so they want you to stick to what they're already paying for in some cases. So yeah, that district approval can also be a huge piece of that as well. So thank you for sharing those responses in Pear Deck. We've highlighted a few of them here that kind of are representative of the thinking in the room. Please continue to share them in Pear Deck as you join with us. So we also know that when we think about making decisions about what apps to use, that your professional judgment is key, and we've used this slide several times here this fall. But it doesn't ring any less true in that as we decide how we're going to engage kids in the specific ways in which we're going to use apps, several of which we'll have a moment to dive into and discuss in just a moment here. It all comes up to what you and what is decided is best for your learners and how you will best engage them. There's no silver bullet or magic formula for the work that we're engaged in now, just as there wasn't when we were in brick and mortar buildings. Or there won't be a silver bullet when we come back to brick and mortar buildings, as some of you already might be in a limited capacity. But certainly this season of our career as educators is going to test our professional judgment in a lot of different ways. As we mentioned, we want to use Pear Deck to a little bit differently than we have before in the past. And what we've created is a sort of wizard, if you will, that will allow you to explore some decisions and recommend some apps to you. So what we're going to ask you to do is to get into that wizard a little bit, as there's some directions posted here on the screen. So you click on the answer question down in the bottom right-hand corner. There is a wizard that you'll be able to cycle through and choose a few different prompts that explore some different ways that you might want to explore apps. And certainly all those apps are linked to, so you have the opportunity to explore and think a little bit about what you see. And we'll ask you to be ready to share some of the thinking in just a few minutes. We want to give everyone some time to explore that and move forward. So we'll give you, we are a little bit smaller crowd today. We'll give you 3 or 4 minutes to go ahead and dig into that and just play around with what's there and be ready to share some thinking with us about what you see here in just a moment. If you have any questions or things that don't appear to be working for you, please either raise your hand in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself, and I'm happy to answer any questions if we as they come up. And if you happen to find yourself at the end, please certainly feel free to go back to the beginning and find some different recommendations that might work for a variety of contexts for you. And just be ready to reflect with us on that experience here in just a moment. Take just another minute or so to dive through before I'll advance the presentation. We'll have a few discussion prompts to talk a little bit about that experience. So be ready to share some thinking with us here in just a moment. Okay. Take a few seconds to finish up the app or the prompt you're exploring, and then we will move on into a little bit more open discussion about what you've seen and what's available to you, and reflect a little bit about what you saw here. Okay. We'll ask you then to reflect a little bit about what you saw there, and just think about that experience of the decision tree, of having that available to you. In what ways might that decision, or in what ways rather, did that decision tree help to support your thinking about apps? So please give us a sampling of your thinking there in Pear Deck, and we'll talk about some of what's in the room here in just a moment. Yeah, I do see some responses being worked on here, so we'll give you just another moment to get that thinking out into the room. Okay. And what we're seeing is a few different flavors of the same response, is that it opened up some thinking, right? So I've only highlighted one of the responses here. But it just certainly opened up some thinking about how we can use some of the apps, and especially highlighted some synchronous apps. So Pear Deck here is a great example, and Nearpod is a very close and friendly competitor to it. Maybe not so friendly, I guess, that really support that synchronous instruction. But there are some other ways, things like Padlet that come up as synchronous recommendations as well, that might also be helpful for those different conversations. Certainly, as we see another response come in, we're talking about different learning environments and different applications of them. And that matters, right? Though when we want students to interact might impact what apps we choose. If we choose apps that require a little more student creativity and thinking and more of an extended response, that might not be the greatest use of synchronous class time, but it might certainly be a good independent practice assignment. So thank you for sharing some of that thinking. Secondly, I want you to think about some of the apps that were recommended to you through the wizard. So no matter how you got to the end and which end you found, if you went through a few different times, feel free to unmute yourself at this point or type some thinking in Pear Deck, whatever is comfortable to you. What are some of the thoughts, experiences you have about any of those apps that were recommended to you? Have you used them before? What works well? What doesn't work well? What would you not use again, or what have you absolutely fallen in love with in the past few weeks? Because it's a bunch of a bigger question, and there's a few different experiences you've had with a few different apps, we're going to give you a little bit of breathing space to get those answers out into the room. Seeing that we've opted for Pear Deck here. Okay. Let's see some of the thinking that is out there in the room. So certainly things like Pear Deck and Kahoot can certainly help with student engagement, but also with adult learner engagement as we're thinking about trainings and different PLs that we might offer. So definitely something to keep in mind. Interesting split here when we've talked, the Pear Deck seems to be used in the K-8 level for one of our participants, but not adopted so widely at the high school. And it seems that they go on to say in a different response that that the high school teachers are using more Nearpod than they are Pear Deck. For me, Pear Deck and Nearpod seem to be kind of a 6 of one, half dozen of the other thing. There are some things that Nearpod does that Pear Deck doesn't do, but for the most part, I found Pear Deck to more easily integrate with some of the presentations and stuff that we've offered. So that might be an interesting conversation to have with some of the folks in decide listening and learning a little bit more about why they're making some of those choices, especially if Pear Deck is available to them at the premium level. Certainly, what also comes to mind is that we think about all these apps that are available to us is that we know that districts are offering PL, and we know that we're offering these opportunities to staff, but we also know that staff tend to, or can be a little reluctant to embrace change, or reluctant to embrace new things, right? Especially if they found a comfort zone in the spring before districts made these really robust turns and pivots to distance learning. So that might be something to be mindful of as well, is in navigating some of those possible sources of resistance in terms of there's ways of being and ways of remote teaching that they've already found, and they might still be trying to find that, find the why behind why making the switch to Pear Deck is more helpful. But certainly when we get to the Q&A time, if we want to open up some discussion around that, I'm happy to hear more about that experience, and we can see what other participants have to say as well. What we're also curious about is what other apps might be added to that decision tree and what categories. So to be fully transparent, as I worked with Anissa to draft and that wizard, we're using a lot of things that we've experienced, but also some things that our partners have. But we also know there's more out there, right? And we can't possibly know everything. So if there are things that you have heard about that you've had some good experiences with, please feel free to just kind of tell us a little bit about those in the Pear Deck prompt here. And if there's a particular use case that stuck out to you, please feel free to tell us about that. So give you just a moment to rack your brains and see if there's anything else that's sticking out to you and where you might add that. And we're seeing a lot of responses saying, well, those are the big ones that we're using, right? That they're, at least what you got to in the wizard seems to capture your experience pretty well. So we'll move forward here to one more question that we want to kind of get to know about your experience with that wizard. And so thinking about that decision tree that you just had some experience with, that asks you to think about different instructional scenarios and how you might use the apps, how helpful would it be to have that decision tree available to your staff? Okay. And we are seeing the bulk of our responses toward the right half of that line, toward the more very helpful portion. If you would like, please tell us a little bit why in chat, why you're seeing that as helpful, or feel free to unmute yourself and why are you placing yourselves over on the very helpful side? What difference do you see it making? Okay. Well, in any case, we are happy to provide a copy of that to all of our registrants here today. So as you look for the follow-up email tomorrow morning, you'll have a link to that presentation. You're certainly happy to, or certainly welcome to share that with your staff members or anyone else that you think that would benefit from it. And as you come across apps and as we come across apps, we will continue to update that as well. We will use the best thinking that both us and our partners come across, and keep that living and breathing, because certainly as more apps will come out, and we'll figure out how we can work with that framework. We do see in chat that the decision tree could be helpful in creating some buy-in, allowing for PD to be targeted instead of generalized, right? So if a lot of staff members are gravitating around a particular use case or a particular app, that's something that would be helpful. And certainly we could differentiate some of those apps as well. If my English department is really focused in using Parlay to use or facilitate Socratic seminars, that's something that might be helpful for us to investigate. And certainly, again, it broadens our horizons, right? That we see Felicia say in chat. It just says, hey, here's some things that are out there and could prompt you to investigate them. So as I said, we're happy to send that out to you as part of tomorrow's follow-up email, whether you are here with us live or not today. It's a bit of a shorter session today, but that's really what we wanted to share with you, is that the app selection process, as we talked about in the beginning, it can't be all willy-nilly, right? And we want to be able to provide a framework to our partners. Think about how we choose our apps and what are some of the best use cases for them to really contribute to student engagement and student learning. So before we move to the formal end of today's session, we know it's a short one today, but that's okay, especially given the ramp up in return to face-to-face instruction that many of us are facing here. I want to open it up briefly for any more questions and answers that we might have, especially around some of the apps that might have been lifted and our experiences with them. Please feel free to unmute yourself or put some questions in chat before we move to our official closer of the day. Okay, as you're thinking about any questions you might have, we'll just hit some logistics here to wrap the session up. As you leave today, as you exit the Zoom session, there will be a feedback survey that comes up for you. It gives you a chance to let us know how we're doing here within these sessions and gives us some insight into what else you might like to see. That's also the way we track attendance. So if you are looking for professional learning hours, a completed survey is a completed session in our book. So we'll offer a printed certificate for that. And each feedback survey does come with an exit ticket. In this case, we want to know a little bit more about how distance learning is going for you. So please feel free to tell us about what else would be helpful for us to know. What else do we need to know about other apps or other challenges you're facing here during distance learning, or even returning back to brick and mortar instruction, either full or part-time, so that we can better support you as we go forward here. As I am happy to stay on for any additional questions, comments, or concerns you might have to share. Otherwise, I want to give you back a few moments of your afternoon so you can find some peace or play with some of the apps that were recommended throughout the wizard. Like I said, tomorrow morning we'll be sending out a follow-up email that has a link to that same wizard embedded so that you can share with your staff and faculty to really figure out what makes most sense for them going forward. With that said, we thank you for your time. You're under no obligation to stay here any longer with me, unless you have any questions or any specific discussion you'd like to have. But I do thank you all for staying, spending time with us, and have a great afternoon.